There are some fantastic upsides when it comes to Champions Queue, but I think there are also some downsides. And just like with any new technology, I think you guys can think of some that are currently going on right now. It's the fact that I think this can easily be taken advantage of. Now, I'm not going to go too far into the whole idea that, oh, it's bad for East Coast players or it's bad for the people in amateur, etc. Right? We all know this is about pro players, but I think there are some key downsides for Champions Queue, and one of them, first of all, being innovation in the fact I think it's going to be at an all-time low. Now, that might be weird to say, considering that we're seeing a lot of innovation currently, right? We have supports top with Smite, we got supports mid, like we have a whole different way of playing the game right now, and I think that's fun to see, but it's also the beginning of the season, which is the most volatile part of the game anyways to begin with. But second of all, don't attribute all that innovation to the entire LCS itself. Like, let's be fucking honest. A lot of it is just Cloud9, right? Like you can't say that a lot of this innovation is because of all these different pro players, or the fact that all these pro players are willing to even try it on stage. Is the fact that Cloud9 is actually just a really innovative team, and they're willing to put the drafts, the draft, literally on the stage, and then produce the final paper as like this masterwork for everyone else to then copy. So I think really the only innovation that you're going to see from further moving further into the split, and as we get into summer, etc., is that we're just going to see a lot of innovation from Cloud9, and then from teams if they decide to do internal scrims, because this is classically the way to, hold your cards to your chest, right? And say, okay, you have these great innovative picks because you've been practicing with your academy team. And as we all know anyways, academy is basically just this experimental league to where you can kind of feed off of your academy team and figure out what is kind of the experimental pick. And then you can kind of pick that up later and say it's somewhat proven. Let's give it a whirl, right? So I think one of the bad things about Champions Queue, or rather just solo queue in general, is that it teaches you a way to play the game from a different way of playing it when it comes to pro play. When you think of how to win a solo queue game, the easiest way to do that is, well, it's first of all to just stomp your lane if you're just way better than your lane opponent, but that's often not the case when it comes to a pro and solo queue versus a pro and solo queue. So granted that, the best way to do, to win against the enemy team is to figure out how to take advantage of the lack of comms, right? The lack of communication. That's the easiest way to actually win the game. That's famously how Dopa wins a lot of his games, is that he uses cross-map plays, because it's very difficult to combat that because of lack of comms. And usually lack of comms is how you win solo queue games in the higher parts of high elo. Now, when you think in Champions Queue, everyone is in comm, so you can't really take advantage of that, right? Like that gap is completely kind of shrunken down. Well, now the next best way in order to take advantage of people is to have better trigger discipline than the enemy team, right? So this is the classic NA RAM, or when you're around an objective, is the fact that I think that's an easy skill to take advantage of, is that if you can ready your team to pull the trigger first, then you're going to be ahead of them constantly, because then they have to react to you. So essentially what is happening is that you're putting yourself on the aggressive side rather than the defensive side, because if you're on the defensive, that's going to take more time to react, and you all kind of have to be on the same page in order to react. And that's much more difficult to do. So instead, you just go on the offensive. And so what I think this is going to do is it's going to teach players and teams to be more on the offensive when it comes to the 5v5 kind of, hold the line type of scenario where you're around of an objective kind of dancing, right? Like at a Baron dance or at a Dragon dance. And while I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing, I think one of actually the big pluses of North America is that they know how to team fight when things are kind of set up to where, there's adequate wards. It's kind of a 50-50 scenario. They haven't lost the fucking, the lanes beforehand. I think actually North America is one of the best team fighting regions in the world. I would say the only people that are better than them is the LPL. And I think it's also, too, because the LPL does have great trigger discipline when it comes to that. But other than that, I think North America can actually hold their own against LCK and Europe as far as the team fighting aspect is concerned. But they oftentimes just drop the ball when it comes to macro or setting up an objective or, just the lane state in to begin with, before they get to the actual objectives, etc. But this, I think, might teach them some bad habits, and that's what I'm afraid. They're going to lose probably their biggest strength that they have been known for as a region itself. But if that shores up their entire laning phase and maybe just how they think about the game as far as macro-wise, then it's probably a good trade-off. But as I said, this is one of the significant downsides that I see as far as Champions Queue is concerned and instilling bad habits, because that would be a bad habit even though you trade it off for other good habits. Second thing is that I think Champions Queue is going to incentivize a lot of stream sniping. Now, this is pretty easy, I think, to see in the fact that a lot of streamers or rather a lot of pro players are going to stream. Now, I don't know if there are hard rules against stream sniping, but even if there still is, how is Riot ever going to prove that, by the way? Yes, they could have the ultimate stance of, if we ever catch you stream sniping, you're banned permanently from Champions Queue, but how the fuck are you ever going to be able to check to see if this guy is actually stream sniping? He could do it, on like the low and not do it so conspicuously, and he could occasionally look to where like the jungler is, right? Like, and that's what makes stream sniping so deadly, I guess you could say, within League of Legends, is the fact that if you have eyes on the minimap and Fog of War is basically disabled, you essentially have wall hacks. Now, with wall hacks, the great thing about it, like if we're coming from an FPS mindset, is that you don't necessarily need to give away your clues constantly, kind of like an aimbot, right? It's much more harder to tell if someone has wall hacks versus aimbot. So that's the same thing with League of Legends. So I don't know how you're going to prove it. So I think this essentially does incentivize stream sniping, especially for amateur players. Now, I'm not going to say that pro players are going to be stream sniping. I don't think they would ever want to be even fathomed to be caught by that. But certainly for players that are high up in solo queue that end up getting into Champions Queue, I see that certainly happening, especially if they want to impress certain people that they know are scouters and that are actually looking at them, certain academy teams, etc. Like, I think you have all the incentives, and the prize pool itself, you have all the incentives in order to stream snipe someone. Now, I think the big thing in which we can see maybe that this being a possibility is the fact that you have to think a lot of these pro players have a streaming contract. That means that they have to stream. So if they're filling some of their time by playing Champions Queue and streaming, like they're trying to get good practice, but they're also trying to fulfill their contract obligations. So if you're going to go that route, then it's going to be very easy for you to stream snipe, right? Because there's going to be a lot of pros stream sniping. So it just makes it kind of a no-brainer if you're going to be one of those people that cheat. Now, I think one of the famous instances in which we could see stream sniping being a very big hurdle was Dopa, right? So If you guys didn't know, Dopa, he ended up playing on what is the Chinese super server. And if you guys don't know the Chinese super server, it's like in order to get onto that server, you have to be Diamond 1 and any of the other, I think China has like 30 plus servers. I was like fucking mind boggled when I heard that. But yeah, they have like 30 plus servers. So if you're Diamond 1 on any of those, you get into the super server. Now, he had trouble climbing up to rank 1. And when this server first opened, there was a challenge of whoever got rank 1 got like $250,000 or $500,000 or something. So he was like, all right, I'm going to make this fucking bank. You know, God of solo queue decided to try and get that fucking bag. And he did. But he also did it by getting stream sniped constantly. And on top of that, the second rank and the third rank were actually duo queue. They were a support and an ADC. And they were stream sniping him. So he had to fight all these stream snipers all the way up to the top. And then he had to fight a duo, which was stream sniping him. So he ended up beating everyone, you know, with his classic Kassadin and Twisted Fate combo. But it's like he barely was able to do that. I think he got 1550 LP, which is actually fucking insane. And just imagine if he didn't get held back by stream sniping. Like, he probably would have broke records. But so you could see that there is a massive incentive for stream sniping, and that was for money, and obviously Champions Queue is for money depending upon who gets first place each split. Now obviously East Coast players are getting dicked in this deal, right? It's that you're gonna get insane ping. I know when the server was located in Portland, Oregon, a lot of people say that back in the day it was located in Los Angeles. Like, no, it was located in Portland, Oregon. That's where a big server hub actually is. But it's located in Oregon. I ended up getting like 10 ping when I lived in Seattle. It was fucking bonkers nice. Season 1, Season 2. I think the servers moved in like Season 4, I want to say. Maybe Season 3. But that completely screws over the East Coast servers. Like, you know, like I thought this was GG for all type shit. You know what I mean? I guess that's ESL, but, you know, we're getting close enough with all the different monies handling and different regimes. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But obviously they get screwed over. So that cuts off a large demographic of people and server population. And with that, I think the gap between pro and amateur will actually widen, because when you think of essentially what is Champions Queue, is that all the pro players and all the academy players are going to be just playing pretty much exclusively on that server. So there's no way for you to prove yourself against pros if you're an amateur. You have to then earn your way into this new queue. And who's to say, because, you know, the entry is you have to be Grandmaster, but it's also you have to, you know, be able to be chosen into it, right? And not be a one trick, etc. So there are all these like minutia of criteria. But when you get in there, like, who's to say that you're still just not dog shit because you haven't proven yourself against any other good players, right? Because all the good players are in Champions Queue. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of churn when it comes to getting into Champions Queue and shit players getting in there, and maybe them being overestimated in terms of their skill and whatnot. So that's an entire problem that you have to deal with, of just the churn. On top of that, these amateur players have to keep Grandmaster rank every split. And I think every split is like every 2.5 months or something like that. They divide splits. And so this essentially was done to prevent solo queue from completely dying, but it will still have a very clear impact on these players, you know, having to play within this queue and whatnot. Now, if you guys don't know, to be in Grandmaster has a decay of LP if you don't play for a certain amount of days, just like Challenger, right? So they're like on the same scale. Now, what you can do is you can play an excess amount of games, and you can put it into what's called your bank. And so your bank is able to stack up 14 days. So you can go 14 days without playing a single solo queue game in Grandmasters, and you won't decay in LP. So that's going to be able to keep you in Grandmaster. But once again, like, you still have the possibility of decaying. So therefore, you have to constantly keep playing Grandmaster, solo queue and whatnot. And I think this is going to kind of harm, like, just their practice themselves as far as, like, the amateurs are concerned, because they have to play in this shitty solo queue, which no pro players are playing in. On top of that, you have to think, okay, well, you already pushed away basically a lot of the East Coast players, right? Because they're going to be getting like 100 ping and shit. But you also push away against the people that have jobs, right? Like, say if you have a part-time job and you still live in the West Coast, but your hours overlap when Champions Queue is open, you're kind of fucked. Or maybe you have night classes at college or something. You're kind of screwed. So I think, and like, yeah, like, who cares? This is supposed to be about the pros, right? Champions Queue is supposed to be about the pros. It's about making them better. But essentially what you're doing is you're damaging the entire pipeline. And I think you're damaging it more than you thought it was, because you're like, yeah, East Coast players are going to get screwed. But did you ever think of the West Coast players that also may have a time restriction on when they can actually play? Because the hours in which this slot takes up is actually quite significant. I think it starts at like 6 or 5 o'clock and then it goes all the way till 2 a.m. or something like that. And it's like, well, what happens if you work from 6 to 10 p.m.? Like, you only have like a very small window in order to play solo queue. So that cuts out another part of the demographic of what would be within solo queue. So I think you're going to get less players than you initially thought you would, because you didn't take into account the actual time restriction of Champions Queue itself. So the pipeline gets damaged, but maybe it also then reveals that North American scouts were just too lazy to watch solo queue, so they'll just be able to grab from the Champions Queue, and maybe we'll still even see more amateur players get into the spotlight. Now, to top it all off, I think the very big problem that we might see is end of split griefing. Now, if you guys haven't kept up with Korean solo queue in the past, is that this was a very common thing, that at the very end of the year, at the end of the season, there would be players that would just grief other players, pro players, streamers, etc. They would just grief the fuck out of them, feed their games so that they would tank their allies' LP. And so, they wouldn't get rank 1 or whatnot. Like, this famously happens to Faker a lot at the very end of the season. And I feel like that could be a recipe for disaster in Champions Queue, because now there's a prize pot, right? So say if you're an ally, like you're in an amateur team and one of your buddies is on the opposite team, you could just throw a kill or two at the enemy team, and no one would even be able to really know, as long as you do it eloquently enough. And so essentially what you're doing is you're allowing your buddy to get a prize pool. And then you could make a backdoor deal and just say, yo, like, let's just share that pot, right? As long as anytime we match up, I'm going to feed maybe a stupid kill here or a stupid kill there, and we won't make it too obvious. I could certainly see something like this happening every split, especially if there are amateur players at the very top and players that are, try-harding. And I think all this is going to do, too, at the end of the day, is it's going to incentivize people, especially amateur players, try-harding, abusing the meta, not stretching out or expanding ideas of maybe how to expand the meta. I think it's going to incentivize a lot of pro players to do the same if they want that extra amount of money, because, they want to do the try-hard thing and they want to try and abuse the meta or abuse what's strong, etc. And while, yes, largely that is what solo queue was to begin with anyways, over in the regular solo queue ladder, there needs to be a difference or an idea of what do you want solo queue to be or Champions Queue to be. Do you want it to be like solo queue, or do you want it to be even better than what solo queue is? And I'm not just talking about because of the population or how good players actually are. Is the fact that do you want to take advantage of everything that an isolated solo queue could offer, which would then attune it to improving your skills at lane, or improving your skill at the laning phase, improving your team fight, improving your objective, improving your innovation tactics, right? You could have all of this if you actually wanted to, but I feel like that's not going to happen because there's this prize pool attached to it at the end of the day, which is, I think, going to lead maybe to some nefarious things. Like these are just some of the downsides that I'm thinking of, but I'm overall pretty optimistic of Champions Queue. I'll just say that at the very end. And also even leave a little bonus to you guys in the fact that at least Canadians don't have to pay taxes on the prize money. So if you file a 1040 NR, as I've been reading on the internet a little bit when I was looking this up, you don't have to pay the 30% tax that Americans would have to pay for prize money. So, I mean, at least somebody wins at the end of the day, right?